In May 1897 in St. Petersburg, one of the strongest players on the planet sat down in the 13th game of a world-class match and played the worst chess opening ever seen. On purpose. His name, Mikhail Chigorin. And you see, Chigorin was not some club player experimenting. This was the man who had twice challenged Wilhelm Steinitz for the world championship, the father of the Russian school, and chess's loudest voice against the idea that positions could be reduced to rules. His opponent was Emanuel Schiffers, and this is the part that gets interesting. Schiffers was the man who had taught him how to play, so when Chigorin played the worst chess opening in here, he was playing it against the man who had taught him the very rules he was breaking. White opens with pawn to e4. Chigorin answers pawn to e5. Schiffers plays knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn. Completely normal so far. And now, Chigorin plays pawn to f6. This is known as the Damiano Defense, named after the one man in the 16th century who was actively warning people not to play it. History definitely did him dirty there. Here's why this is so bad. It looks like it defends e5. It doesn't. It blocks the natural square for black's own knight, it opens a diagonal straight at the black king, and it does not develop a single piece. White's correct answer is knight takes e5 anyway, ignoring the defense entirely, because if black recaptures with the f-pawn, then queen to h5 check arrives and the whole position collapses. Black either hands over a rook or gets his king dragged into the open board and hunted down. That's the refutation that's been known since the 1400s. Schiffers plays knight takes e5, and Chigorin does not recapture. He plays queen to e7. This is the only way to stay alive, and it's the beginning of the whole idea. The knight on e5 is now attacked by the queen, and nothing is defending it, so it has to run. Knight back to f3. Chigorin plays pawn to d5. Looking at the e-file, that pawn on e4 is pinned to his own king, so Schiffers plays pawn to d3 to prop up the pawn. Chigorin trades on e4, Schiffers recaptures, and Chigorin plays queen takes e4 with check. He has his pawn back, and material is now level. Bishop to e2 blocks the check, and black is still worse. The engines put white at about a pawn and a half here. Chigorin's king is stuck in the middle, his kingside is full of holes, his knight can't go to f6, and his queen is standing in the open getting kicked around while white develops with tempo. This is exactly what Damiano promised would happen if people played this opening. Knight to c6 from black. White castles, bishop to d7, and now knight to c3, attacking the queen again. Chigorin goes to g6. And this, not the opening, is the real mistake of the game. Queen to e6 or queen to f5 kept black in unpleasant but holding territory. However, queen to g6 nearly doubles white's advantage in one move because the queen is now standing on a square a bishop can reach, and Schiffers sees it. Knight to e5, forking the knight on c6, the bishop on d7, and the queen all at once. And you'd say, what's the big deal? I simply take, right? Wrong, because after Chigorin takes the knight, in this position, we have the move that decides the character of the entire game. Bishop to h5, pinning the queen to the king, so it basically cannot go anywhere. So, what are you going to do?
Well, Chigorin's response is one of the best worst-looking moves you'll ever see. He castles queenside, he just leaves the queen hanging. Schiffers takes it, and Chigorin recaptures with the h-pawn, queen for a bishop. On paper, disaster, except the engine agrees with him. Castling long is Stockfish's #1 choice in that position, because the queen was never going to escape in a way that mattered, and this way Chigorin gets something for her. His king tucked away on the queen side, both rooks to be potentially connected, 2 bishops, and, most importantly, the h-file ripped wide open, with a rook already sitting on it. Queen to e2 from white, bishop to d6 pointing straight at h2. Schiffers plays knight to e4 hitting the bishop, a natural, active-looking move, and it's the moment the game flips. Simple moves like pawn to h3 or bishop to f4 would have kept white completely in control. Knight to e4 throws away 3 pawns of advantage instantly because of what's now available. Knight to f3 check, sacrificing the knight for a crazy attack on the white king. And look at what makes it work. The knight cannot be ignored, because if white declines with king to h1, then rook takes h2 is immediate checkmate, as the rook is protected by that very knight on f3 and the bishop. So Schiffers accepts the sack and takes with pawn, then bishop takes h2 check. King to g2 is forced, bishop to h3 check, bringing the other bishop in from d7. And now white has a very tempting option, king to h2, snapping off the second bishop, but it loses on the spot. After king to h2, black plays bishop to f1, which isn't just winning a rook, but the queen as well because of the discovered check. Schiffers doesn't fall for it. King to h1. Chigorin retreats bishop to e5, and the position is now dead level, because black simply threatens to give bishop to h2 check forever. King to g1, bishop to h2 check, king to h1, bishop to e5. Twice around the loop, Chigorin is signaling he'll take the draw, and Schiffers, still a piece up on the scoreboard, refuses it. Queen to e1, breaking the repetition and playing for the win. It's the wrong decision though. The moment he steps out of the repetition, black is objectively better. Chigorin plays bishop to g4 discovered check again, the same trick. King to g1, and now bishop to f3, and suddenly white is one move from being mated. Rook to h1 would be checkmate with the bishop on f3 covering the escape. Schiffers has to play knight to g3 just to defend. Black finally develops his last piece with knight to e7, white plays queen to e3, and the bishop drops back to c6, still glaring down the long diagonal at the white king. Then Schiffers takes on a7, grabbing a pawn right next to the enemy king. It looks like the greed that gets you punished in every instructional video ever made. It isn't. The engine says it's the best move on the board. Still, the punishment was available anyway, but Chigorin missed it and plays pawn to b6. Now, instead of that, Chigorin had a forced mate in 6 sequence, which begins with rook to h1 check, and it's gorgeous. Knight takes rook is forced, then bishop to h2 check, king takes bishop, rook to h8 check. White can only throw the bishop in the way with bishop to h6, rook takes bishop with check, king to g3, and now the quiet piece finishes it. Knight to f5 check, king to f4, rook to h4 checkmate. He missed it though, and then he misses it again on the very next move, after bishop to e3, where rook to h1 still mates. He plays knight to f5.
Schiffers plays pawn to f4, another inaccuracy, and Chigorin takes on g3, but here he should have taken on e3 instead, and he'd still have been winning. Pawn takes e5 is now forced for white, and it's back to level. Then rook to h1 check, one move too late, and this time it's the wrong move. Taking on e5 kept things balanced. King to f2, rook to h2 check, king to g3 forced, anything else is mate, rook to h8, bringing the last rook up, queen to a6 check, king to b8, and bishop takes b6. Schiffers is now winning by a clear margin. But in this position, we see rook to g2 check, king to f4, rook to h4 check, king to e3, rook to h3 check, king to f4, rook to h4 check. Draw agreed by repetition when white could have won it. That's the joke inside the Damiano. If you drag a stronger, better prepared opponent into a position neither of you has ever seen, the advantage on the scoreboard and the advantage over the board are two different things. So tell me in the comments, at what point would you have taken the draw if you were Schiffers? And did you spot the mate in 6 before I showed it? If you got value from this video, please like and subscribe, because I've got more games where the losing move was the best move on the board coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.